All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we explore the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff to get the questions you need answered to build out your digital learning ecosystem. So today I'm taking a little bit of a break from the tech providers, and I'm doing the first practitioner episode. And today I'm joined with Bas Debbink, and we're talking about data privacy and ethics. Super exciting conversation. I know I'm excited about it. Some people might be like, I'm not sure, but I think this is going to be a fun one. Bas, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show, Chris.
Yeah, perfect. Well, hey, like every other episode, we'll start it with the traditional training icebreaker. So we talked about this backstage, but I don't know the answer yet. So, Bas, why don't you tell me and everyone else what is the most interesting place that you've traveled and why were you there?
In September of 2017, I went on a safari to Kenya and Tanzania. So it stops right there. That's the most interesting place I've ever been. I've been, to several places growing up in Europe and living in the US, but just one of those bucket list things that I decided in February, I'm going to do it in 2017. I booked the trip. And it was an amazing experience. Clearly, taking a small Jeep and driving around all the safaris and all the parks that are out there, seeing all the animals that you expect to see. And that I don't think anything will beat that in the next couple of years.
Okay. And when was this?
2017, September.
2017. Okay, so just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, time for my next bucket list trip.
Nah. So what okay, see, now I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
What would your next bucket list trip be?
I would say probably New Zealand and visit all the Lord of the Rings sites.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, it's funny. I've been watching Border Security. I think it's a show on Netflix. And yeah, here, data privacy, important stuff here. But there's so many people that go to New Zealand to see the Lord of the Rings sites actually on the show. It's a pretty common theme of people that they tag. So make sure you don't bring anything into the country that you're not supposed to bring, or you'll get tagged over there.
It's always just me, myself, and I.
Do you travel a lot?
I try to. Haven't been doing it as much as I'd like, so that's why I said I just need to put a stake in the ground and say I'm going to do it this year, and then I'll go. Yeah. How about you?
Okay. Travel? Me? No. I did it earlier. I did it earlier in my career, and not only is travel's just not my thing, but the other part of it is the fact that I have 5 little kids, 8 and under, so going to the grocery store is my idea of travel. That's about the extent of travel that I can do. So yeah, no. But so let's start diving into this a little bit. And one of the first things that I want to talk about is just defining what this stuff means. So we've said in the posts I've said leading up to this, we've talked about data privacy and ethics, but I'd love your take on what does that actually mean, for me and for anybody else.
Yeah, and it's been changing so much over the past few years. Data was always there in a very limited amount. In the past few years, I've seen, and everybody's seen, kind of an exponential rise in the amount of data that is being collected, that is being provided. And the challenges that come with it, there were, I would say, 5-6 years ago, there were very few specific regulations specifically targeted to data. And as you can see now, the GDPR and some of the other countries and regions implementing similar laws, that now it's become a very kind of separate kind of specialty and entity that now we have to be aware of. And from a privacy and ethics perspective, in the past, you would enter your data wherever and it was gone. Now people are being given the option to say, no, you can't collect this particular piece of information about me. Or if you've already collected it, I want you to delete it. It's one of the GDPR tenets that people have more control over where their data goes and what people do with it. So to me, it's that entire discipline of collecting data, what do you do with it, and how do you dispose of the data, whether it's through an internal record retention or simply from a user, and whether that's a learner or someone who buys something on your website. If they request that that data be deleted, do you have that capability to do it in a compliant way?
Okay. So with that, and I know I've seen that just in my career from implementing big learning tech, right? The questions I get asked from IT, the policies that I have had to go through when implementing a new vendor, things like that, it has changed because of those capabilities. I'm curious from the IT side of things, where do you see that responsibility falling? Is it, what is the role that L&D plays in that versus IT versus the vendor itself?
Right. Well, I see IT as an enabler,
Okay.
always. So as a business function, and learning and development being one of them, they have to set the requirements, and IT has to offer the capabilities to meet those requirements. So as a learning and development leader or specialist or a stakeholder, you have to be aware that these laws exist, and you have to make them part of your learning solution and learning strategy, and collaboration with IT, and whether that includes compliance or cybersecurity. They all need to be involved in that learning strategy from the beginning. You don't want to start running into a solution and then finding out later that you did the wrong thing, and now your CEO is in jail, and just doesn't look good on your performance plan. Um,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would look a lot worse than just a bad performance plan.
Yeah, did not meet expectations probably, but and again, I know those functions like a compliance or IT are sometimes seen, as a kind of a roadblock, or a break, I'd say in the best case. But they're not. I mean, they are there to help you and to make sure you're doing the right thing, and you have to involve them from the start. I hate to use the word agile because I think it's highly overused, and it's just a
corporate buzzword.
It's common sense repackaged to make people take certifications and buy books and things like that. But the principle is good. You start on a solution and you meet with the stakeholders at every step of the way, and make sure that all your needs are being met. Whether it's again from a learning function or from a security function or a compliance function. All these people need to be aware at every step of the way. Okay, this is what we need right now. First of all, does it meet your needs? And we can have a whole separate discussion about translating between technology speak and business speak, and vice versa. But focusing just on the data privacy and ethics aspect, you need to make sure that again everybody's aligned from the start, and have those conversations constantly.
Well, and when you talk about that alignment and partnership, I can say that a lot of times, at least in my experience, there has been a little bit of a tension between IT and L&D. A little bit of healthy tension between us in terms of, like you said, IT can be perceived as a barrier. It's in the way, it's slowing us down. We want to do these things, and why are they asking all these questions and making us jump through all these hoops?
Sure.
Which, to some degree, and we talked about this before going live, 10 years ago, that may have been a little more true. And I think there are times where there's some things where 10 years ago, when you were looking to do something, there weren't the data privacy risks. And honestly, there weren't the regulations and potential implications of what you're doing.
Right.
That's a completely different world now. In terms of, you go out and buy a tool, you're capturing a lot of data on people. And that's a different world than, well, I bought a new piece of software that we're using to create e-learning, and it's not necessarily capturing learning data. How have you seen those kind of conversations? Are you seeing, with learning and development and just IT in general, that partnership evolving?
A little bit, and I've been on both sides of the house. Whether it's an IT function or a business function, working in commercial training, that's a whole different animal. I mean, they see something shiny and they go for it, and then whether you're if you're an IT person or a compliance person, like yes, it's really cool, and it probably will do what you need, but let's consider these aspects, and that's, I think, where the challenge is. You're an L&D professional. You're not a technology professional or a compliance professional or a cybersecurity professional, unless you've had, a very interesting kind of career roadmap. So those conversations need to happen, and it's certainly more an awareness that these functions exist and that these concerns exist, so you can have those conversations. Like you say, 10 years ago, did not really exist. IT spoke technology, the business function spoke business. There's very little interaction. IT would deploy a solution to 10, 100,000 people, and the business would go, what is this? Where did this come from? Why did we get this? I think that is improving, certainly. The fact that they're, again, looking at project management, that there are user stories. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then IT can say, okay, let us help you find the solutions. Don't go out and find the solution yourself. Because technology vendors even speak a different language. The one favorite thing I always tell business partners is, it's on the roadmap means no. So just remember that. It's a different kind of doing business with technology vendors. And you have some immediate needs, you have some long-term needs. Work with the business strategy, and make sure that you're, as a learning and development specialist, you're aligned with the business strategy, and make sure that flows through all the way again to the enabling functions like in information technology and the compliance.
Okay. I love that. That's going to be the quote of the show. It's on the roadmap means no.
Yeah.
To all the L&D people listening, yeah, there you go. Now you know when you hear that, just be like, okay, so the answer to that is no.
Right.
So you talked about this a little bit, and I think this is something that can be a difficult area to know how to navigate as somebody because as I look at learning and development, there are a lot of people in learning and development who didn't come here because they were into technology. It's not really what attracted people to learning and development. And that world's being changed, that now technology is such an integral part of learning and development. You have to have some of that background and some of that, ability to navigate that territory if you're going to survive in this space. What is your take, though, on the right balance? Because you mentioned it earlier. It doesn't mean you need to be a compliance specialist or certified in cybersecurity or able to program and code necessarily. But at the same time, I personally think it's a risk if you don't know enough and you're just handing it off to IT or compliance and saying, hey, just, what, I don't deal with tech, you deal with it, and just let me know, when it's done. Yeah. Where's your take on what is that right balance, and what are some of the important things that maybe learning leaders should be more in tune with?
Yeah. And it's across all business function. When you look at HR with all the robotic process automation, the conversation you had last week. Technology is out there, and it offers more and more capabilities. The questions you need to ask is, even if you can do it, should you do it?
Right.
I think just that awareness needs to be part of as a learning and development specialist. Again, if IT comes to you and say, hey, we can do this, like, well, is that really something that we want to do? Vice versa, as a learning and development specialist or leader, no, you don't need to have a security certification or have a compliance certification, but again, you have to be aware that these functions exist to help you achieve your objectives. So a basic knowledge is certainly very helpful. The communication between those groups and the learning and development department is really what's going to make or break your project or your effort or your strategy.
Okay. Yeah. And I've seen situations where, people get too far down the line without looping IT in or without partnering, and then they think they're at the finish line only to find out, oops.
Right. Yeah.
We got to start the whole thing over.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. As an effort that I did for a med device commercial training company was implementing a blended learning environment. Everybody's moving to virtual training or blended training, and the vendor says, hey, we can do this and this and this, and give you some demos. Everything works great. then you implement it, and then you find out, or you're ready to implement it, and you find out that your IT group throttles video bandwidth, audio bandwidth. You have to reach people who are on a 56K dial-up. And again, this is real live information. People that are not in the US or in Europe or in heavily technology focused regions of the world, they may not have the same capabilities. And you'd rather find that out sooner than when you're ready to implement it, and then
you've spent a bunch of your budget on something.
Yeah, right. You get a call from a district manager or from a regional director and says, "Hey, none of my folks can access your training because, again, bandwidth capabilities or restrictions or device restrictions."
Yeah. So with this and on this kind of the why is it important for us to do this? My personal experience has been that I understand why IT people a lot of times struggle with learning and development, because we do. I won't stereotype all of us, but it's not uncommon for us to just, like you said, kind of get excited because we saw a new thing, and then we chase it, and we're planning on bringing it in without really thinking through, what are we trying to do? What are the implications of that? How are we going to do all this stuff? So I can see from an IT standpoint, it can feel a little bit eye roll when learning and development comes with another cool thing that they want to do.
Yeah.
My experience has been, as I've grown in knowing more about the tech and spending a lot of time learning the tech, it is much easier to partner with IT when they recognize you are thinking very similar to the way they're thinking about things, and you've thought through some of these things. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. And it's simply also, or additionally, I would say it's the way training is being performed. When you think 10 years ago, where classroom training was probably 60, 70, 80%, I certainly don't have the data. IT didn't really have a stake in it. As training becomes more and more technical, now they know that language. And exactly like you said, you start to think the same way as they do, or they start to think the same way as you do. At least there's some common ground now that you can discuss. And again, don't start with the solution in mind. Just say, this is what we need to do for the organization. You're part of the organization. We're trying to develop your organization as well. I don't know whether it's an individual, team, the whole organization. Let's make this organization the best it can be.
Yeah.
And I need your help. People love to hear, I need your help. So that's a good.
Well, and I think there's opportunity for us to adopt some of the IT processes that really weren't necessarily learning and development processes, like requirements gathering, really taking a formal process of documenting what are the requirements that we have, because that forces you to think, what are we trying to do?
Yep.
And then what requirements do we have to do that? That also, I think, help you move along, figuring out, well, do we already have something, or do we already have that capability somewhere? And it helps you as an IT professional say, well, wait a minute, we know about something else or something that we're working on that actually can accomplish those things.
Right.
Yes?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. On the flip side, being devil's advocate, sometimes you have standards within IT and say, hey, I need to do virtual training. Well, this particular platform is the standard for the enterprise, and it may not be the right solution for commercial. But again, you need to have that discussion, and we need to get escalated to a leadership level and say, yes, we know this is the standard. However, these are the requirements, these are the needs, and these are the business benefits if we go with a different solution. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. But it's a new discipline and a new kind of communication and discussion that needs to start happening. And like you say, the requirements gathering, yes, it's some additional work up front, but it will save you so much headache further down the path. So preparation should be 80% of the project, and this should become a routine.
Yeah. Well, I can certainly validate your statement there. And maybe sometimes that's right where it comes. The first time you start doing things, or if you're new into the territory, it may be hard to believe, we can hear you say, or hear me say, hey, take the time on the front end, build those partnerships, do it the right way. You won't regret it on the long end. But if you haven't done it, it's easy to say, yeah, right. This is just a barrier. But I've been through it enough times to say, Yeah, it's true. You
Yeah.
will get to some point if you don't go through the right process, and it will blow up, and you will wish that you had
Yeah,
taken the
no,
time to identify that
right,
sooner.
right. And similar case can be made for automating an existing process. It's, the lift and shift. Okay, I'm doing this currently, and I want to automate it. And I would say majority of cases, people don't look at the process to see if that can be improved. They just take an existing process, automate it, and if you're lucky, it works, but you still have the same inefficiencies as you had before. So take that time ahead of time to look at your current process, whether it's manual or hybrid, and say, okay, what are some of the opportunities that we haven't looked at in the past 5 years before we put it into a system or throw it up in the cloud and have people remote access it.
Yeah. Well, and that's true of automation. That's true of machine learning. It's a lot of
Right.
these emerging technologies
Mhm.
where we've gotten away for a long time with not necessarily going back and cleaning up some of our process or some of our data and things like that. And now you have these new emerging technologies that can look at it and speed up the process and analyze the data far faster. But if you
Mhm.
don't do that cleanup work, all you're going to do is speed up bad process and make bad decisions that much
Right.
faster.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And to kind of get back to the topic,
Yeah.
in this automation piece, we started the conversation. All this data that is now being gathered, and with all these new capabilities, additional data is being gathered that hadn't been gathered before. And how do you make sure that you keep it safe and you do the right thing with that information?
So before we dive into that one, because I
Mhm.
think that's where we're going to really go next is into what some of these emerging technologies are and how that data that we're capturing is changing. But before we do,
Mhm.
as any recommendations to learning and development people on, hey, because we get hit up by a ton of vendors all
Right.
the time
Oh,
asking questions, wanting to
yeah.
talk. Are there some good questions that we can just dig into that maybe don't require you to be a deep IT or data privacy specialist, but
Mhm.
at least help you start to vet through, hey, I need to at least validate some of this high level stuff
Mhm.
before even considering it? Because if I know it's just a no out of the gate,
Right.
then why not save some time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's kind of funny because the first question I would ask, like, what is your roadmap? Kind of harking back to it's on the roadmap,
Okay.
but it's good to know. At least ahead of time as to what they're working on. I would say that one of the it really depends on the kind of organization that you work for. Is
Okay.
your solution scalable? You may be looking for a solution for a particular group within your organization. Well, that may be a great solution for the entire enterprise. However, can the solution handle the amount of users, the amount of information? I would say that should certainly be at the top of the list of questions you need to ask vendors. And it's funny, when I attended a conference, I'd say 3-4 years ago, these vendors, I think out of the 60 vendors, I would say more than half offered their own LMS.
Okay.
Guess
Yeah.
LXP. And now, where are we now? Another example is, 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was talking about the MOOC, the massive online open community. Now we've gotten back to more personalized training. So the pendulum is kind of, swinging back and forth on that kind of stuff. So again, from a business strategy perspective, know where your business is going and translate that information into the questions that you can ask the vendor. Here's where the business is going. Here are my immediate needs, but for the long term, we need to make sure that we're aligned for that. Can your solution be with us every step of the way in this journey?
Okay. So let me ask you, I love your take on this because I think your point is spot on in terms of thinking bigger than the immediate need, right? I think that's, the takeaway from what you just said is think bigger than just, well, we're trying to reach this group of people for this right now, because going through that implementation and going through all this process for something and you haven't thought beyond that, or maybe there isn't a use case or it's not capable,
Mhm.
you may want to reconsider whether that's really the right path to go. But on the same time, on the same side, technology is changing so fast. And one of the things that I've seen as a bit of a tripping point for our industry in some regards is the whole concept of you buy this technology for life, right? You buy this technology for life and then you just hang on to it. That's shifting, right?
Oh,
That is shifting. I think, I look at it as every 3 years, you really should be evaluating whether or not you have the right tech. How do you balance that so you're not just going after things for short-term things, but at the same time, you're not looking at it as well, we bought this, now we're stuck with it for the next 20 years?
yeah, no, that's a great point and a great question. I think it's very important to find a strategic partner in your vendor that, again, can be with you every step of the way, that has the capabilities to do what you need right now, but has, whether their internal expertise or by acquisition, get more expertise in being and have them show that to you. And I know it's for startups, it's going to be a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But have them show you the history of how they've helped other companies in their journey. Will there be point solutions? I don't think that you can ever get away from that. And but by point solution, I mean, yes, you may have a platform strategy from a technology perspective. Big vendors, maybe multi-discipline functions. Other than learning and development, but yeah, sometimes you will have specific needs for training in compliance, commercial, manufacturing, and you may have really great companies that are very specialized in that particular area that right now they offer the best solution, and hopefully ongoing they will do that. But be sure that your own internal environment and your organization is agile enough. Keep using that word again. Agile enough to make the decisions. Yeah, like you said, every 3 to 4 years things change. I would say even more rapidly right now when you think about a technology perspective. Talking about kind of a security theme here. It's a password or biometrics. It's what you have, what you know, and what you are. You are your iris scan or your fingerprint. You know your password or your PIN, and you have your bank pass or your phone. Well, now the mobile phone is all three. You have the phone with which you can access information. To get access to your phone, you can have a scan, a face scan, or a fingerprint, and you put in maybe a code. Well, 5 years ago, who would have thought that cell phone have all these three components? So yes, technology will continue to change at a pace that we can't even imagine, and things we haven't thought of yet will be there in 3 to 5 years. Again, make sure that you're, from an organization perspective and also a technology perspective, that everybody can adjust quickly.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it is. I don't think there's, and in one of the posts I said this, there's how many shades of gray with this, because it's not just a black and white, you do X, do Y, which is making this more difficult in terms of how do you do that. Right. Gary brought up a good question, and I'm curious, how you see this, because there is this whole, and I think, Gary, let me know if I'm not asking it correctly, but really this whole idea of proof of concept, because I think this is something that is important. And some of the things we've been talking about are, once you validated the proof of concept, now you're going to go big scale. That's where you start saying, all right, before we go here, let's make sure we check all the boxes. And you can, for the sake of buzzwords, avoid being agile by throwing all that process and rigor into a proof of concept. And I think sometimes you can swing too far. You can say, well, we have to go through all these processes every single time. And now you never get the chance to innovate, because the time and energy it takes to go through that, you can't do it. So how do you balance that? Or how would you recommend that we balance that, where we say, hey, and how do we have that conversation with IT to say, this isn't a full scale thing. Right. We want to test it out to see if it's capable of scaling, or if it truly achieves what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think they understand that language. To your point earlier, I think we're more and more aligned from a business function, with an L&D perspective and a technology perspective. I I'm being positive and kind of hopeful that all these functions exist to help the business move along. So if they feel that whatever they're doing can help the business be successful, again, maybe naive, but hopefully not, then again, it's our job to show that this is what we need to be successful. Here, we've done some of the work already. Here's a proof of concept. Again, we're not solutioning, hopefully. But again, from a requirements perspective, this is what we wanted to do. This is, maybe a kind of what we want it to look like. Don't go too far down the design path. It's a whole different kind of discipline, whether you're in learning or in a technology or a vendor perspective. But yeah, no, proof of concept, very important step, I would say. Still take your time, even if the proof of concept is approved. Don't go from that all the way into the final solution. Make it enterprise-wide. Go through the steps of making an iterative process and say, okay, we're doing this piece. Does it look what the proof of concept look like? Okay, yes, no. If yes, okay, let's move on to the next piece. Make sure you take your time in going through the implementation.
Well, and what I've found that's worked well for me is, and this is my terminology for it, is I've always tried to create an incubator. That's what I call my proof of concept thing. Mm-hmm. And that's where, from a data protection standpoint, I'm not putting learner data. I'm not doing some of this other stuff. It's truly just experimentation data. It's a low investment, low risk. Let's try this thing out and see if we can make it work. And if it does, then we'll start talking about how we carry that forward. And that doesn't require all the process and all the, assessment and stuff. As long as you're, like you said, keeping it small, not getting too invested in it, and understanding that. And the reason I call it an incubator is because, like, some eggs will hatch and some won't. And you have to have that comfort with not everything you do a proof of concept in is going to go somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And again, depending on kind of the training effort, make sure you've got the right people involved. Incubator can be a little too isolated as well. But again, if you capture all these kind of additional requirements, whether it's data protection or compliance at the beginning, maybe you don't even want to continue with a certain idea if immediately a concern is identified in something that you're thinking about.
Yeah. So now let's jump into some of these technologies and how and why this data is changing. Because before we came live, we were talking about it, and we should have hit live back then, because now we're repeating ourselves. But it's totally fine, because one of the things I brought up was this is a little bit of new territory, especially for us in learning and development, because historically, the data we were capturing, if we were capturing anything really, was pretty limited. It was completion data, maybe some attendance data. We might have had some, rubrics, probably not even digital rubrics. It was all probably printed out. And so that's what we were doing. So it was very low risk from a data standpoint. The hackers aren't out to steal my, IT e-learning completion data. But that's changing as we move into this new immersive technologies. So I'd love to hear, just from your side, how is the data changing, and what data are we capturing now that does make some of these new learning solutions more high risk to an organization or to an individual?
Yeah, and I think one of the responders to it on LinkedIn made a great point with AR VR becoming more and more prevalent in training. Now you're capturing. So thank you whoever posted that. That was a great addition to this topic. You're capturing people's haptic information, and information that 3-4 years ago people didn't even think of as part of learning. But when we think, and that's certainly near future, I would say, even though I've got my own thoughts about AR VR and where it is. So let's say it's part and neutral is kind of.
But even voice, right? I mean, think about voice. That is now, and that is something that we are doing.
Yeah, and another thing you're doing, when you work if you do training in a manufacturing environment, authentication to a training system, I've seen it. It's done through biometrics, fingerprints, iris scans. Okay, now we're talking about something different than a password. If you get someone's password, that's bad. If you get access to someone's fingerprint, now again, when you think about the components of security, now you have information of what a person is. Their fingerprint information, their iris scan information. Now that protection becomes even more important. and that exists now. So again, it's a great topic to explore further, and it makes the whole learning and development, information capturing and managing that information a bit more challenging, but certainly more and more vital.
Yeah. Well, and that's what we were getting towards is thinking about that beyond just what information. And this is where I think upskilling ourselves in technology is helpful, because you may not, if you're not thinking tech and data, you may be thinking, oh, well, this is just a new app that's capturing their voice print and giving them feedback. Well, but think about what data that is now. That's somebody's voice. It's analyzing their voice. That voice clip is being stored in a database somewhere. You hear about scams all the time where people are calling you saying, hey, they're just trying to get you to say the word yes. So the compromise of that voice print being breached carries far more significant implications than, oh, they got my, corporate email address.
Right. Yeah, no, and again, same thing with fingerprint information and facial scan information. Yeah, it opens up a whole different world, because now you have another piece of personal information that can give you access to that person's data, which, up to that point they thought that it's really secure because nobody else has my face or nobody else has my fingerprint, but it is stored digitally somewhere, and can be utilized in not so great ways.
Okay. Yeah. So with that, how, and again, I think this goes back to that whole balancing act. Well, before we go into that, right, add to that complexity, right? So now you're capturing all this other data, this more personal data about people for things where you wouldn't necessarily historically have ever thought, oh, I'm capturing personal, like you said, biometric data for training. That really wasn't a discussion that would have been happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah. Add to that, most solutions and data stuff is now stored in the cloud, which I've seen organizations really struggle with making that transition and feeling comfortable with, okay, so now we don't even have our own secure data. This data is out there. Are you seeing that same kind of transition or challenge as organizations go through this?
Oh, absolutely. It's one thing to have your learners' information stored locally, where you have a limited number of people. Hopefully, you have access if your external firewalls are set up properly. But the cloud is, and one of my favorite memes is, there is no cloud; it's just a computer somewhere else. That information is stored somewhere that people can get access to it, and working with the big cloud providers. You don't have to be an expert in Amazon Web Services or whatever cloud solution you have, but you have to have that conversation with your information security or cybersecurity department, your compliance department. Who owns that relationship with a cloud provider? What happens to that data? What happens in case of breaches? Another development in the past, I would say 5 years, is all these new regulations around data, GDPR. As a learner, I can request the company to get rid of my learner data. 5 years ago, you want to do what? That didn't exist, but now it carries some pretty hefty fines if you can't do that.
That's an understatement.
Right. And even ask a learner for permission to store that information. In the past, it was, hey, I need to do this training. I'll log in, I answer these questions, that's it. Now there's all these rules and regulations, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. We've seen the impact of data breaches pretty much every day. So it's certainly good, but as a learning and development specialist or practitioner, you need to be aware of it. And it's challenging because it changes all the time. Some countries have it, some regions have it, some don't. What if you do business with all those regions? GDPR. Is the person an EU citizen? Okay, are they actually located in the EU? Are the vendors that you do business with that may access your learning management system or learning experience platform? Right. Are they based in the EU? What information
are the servers that are housing the data based in the? I mean, there are a lot of.
You can go down the rabbit hole very fast there. But and again, you don't need to be an expert, but you need to ask those questions from the people who do know the answers.
Well, and if anything, this is validating the point earlier that this is why it's so important to build a strong partnership with the people who are specializing in this. And hopefully everybody watching this knows, like, we're not saying this is how to handle GDPR or all this stuff, right? Absolutely not.
No.
Make that big clarification right now, because big disclaimer across the bottom, because this is very complicated stuff. And honestly, from my perception, I don't even think the regulations have fully figured out how to regulate all of this. It's a little bit of a work in progress as we go.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's been the challenge with when you look at the compliance training. The FDA doesn't tell you how to do something.
Right.
In the regulations, it says you need to do this, and then it gets interpreted 100 different ways by an organization and say try to do the best thing, and then an auditor comes in and says, no, you didn't do it right. You should do it this way. I'm like, oh, why did you tell me that in your regulations? Before we started down this path.
Yeah.
So it's a constant adjustment, and I read something when you look at a higher education, when kind of adaptive learning, kind of going back to the comment I made earlier, this massive online courses. You have universities that offer, Stanford, MIT, traditional, very just regular traditional educational institutions. Now they offer courses online, okay, and maybe they use the adaptive data to steer a learner down a certain path. Well, should it do that? Should there be some validation? Maybe I'm not a good test taker, and I'm brilliant, but tests are not my thing. But based on this path that's predefined in machine learning and artificial intelligence, I get kind of maybe steered away from opportunities that are not good. And I think it's also something that you need to be aware of.
Well, and that's going to be a good transition into the next part of this. But I think kind of closing off the data privacy piece is just really thinking about, and I guess a good way to put it is the information architecture, right? Where is this stuff sitting? And thinking through the fact, a lot of these solutions, and you hinted at it earlier, it's not as black and white anymore. The cloud is it's a computer somewhere. It's just not a computer you own. But the provider you may be working with may be outsourcing that computer to someone else. So it may not even be their servers that the stuff is housed on. So you're not only asking what are their policies, but you're validating, well, what are the policies and things like that of where the data is actually housed, because that may be owned by someone else.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. When you look at a vendor risk management, that becomes a huge concern with, okay, I'm doing business with this vendor, but what do they outsource? This now becomes from a third party becomes a fourth party, and how do you control that?
Yeah,
and that's where compliance and cybersecurity become critical business partners to help you understand that relationship and the impact it has on your business needs or solutions.
Yeah. Well, and now before we transition, the one thing I would say with this is that we're kind of going doomsday prepper here, right? And it can feel a little bit like that, like terrible things and all this stuff, and it's so overcomplicated. And the risk is that can push you to say, I'm just not going to do anything because it just sounds too scary. It's too complicated. So you know what? I'm going to go back to the good old days. And we're just going to do the classroom stuff. We're not going to put anything on the cloud. We're going to stay away from tech because that's safe. And that's not what we're saying. Would you agree? Absolutely not.
No. And actually in that same article about the higher institutions, it's people are becoming so afraid of what is it? Overreach, that they're swinging back too far the other way, and it becomes underreach. So now you're taking away opportunities from people because you're afraid to do something. So again, we've talked about it before. What's that balance? And it's tough. Traditionally, businesses had very siloed functions. You can't have that anymore. There needs to be a lot more collaboration. It doesn't mean to say that everybody has to be an expert in everything. But there's got to be a lot more cross-functional collaboration for this to happen. And with technology becoming pretty prevalent in every aspect of the business and our daily lives, you can't get away from that anymore. And it shouldn't
No,
be scary.
no, it shouldn't.
You're using technology every day. We're using technology now. When people are not watching this, they're watching their phone. So it's what you're using. And again, you don't need to be an expert to use a cell phone. So hopefully whatever solutions that the vendors come up with, it should become as easy as using your cell phone or stepping in your car and driving. And that same with AR and VR and any of the newer technologies that are going to have an impact on learning.
Well, and that's why, for me personally, I'm so passionate about helping bring learning and development into this digital age, because it can feel scary until you get into it and you start making those partnerships and you start upskilling yourself in some of these things, not to become an expert, but to know enough to say, yeah, it's a little bit of uncharted territory, but it's navigatable, and the end goal is worth navigating that path. So let's keep moving forward. Let's just do it carefully.
Yeah. And I mean, on the learning development side, as an instructional designer, you use technology to create your courses. And yes, it'll change. And yes, you'll have to reskill yourself to keep up with that. On the development side, I think that's where some of the major challenges are, from a traditional classroom training to all these new ways of training people, whether it's through mobile or just in time, virtual training, blended training. So I think that's where some of the catch up still needs to happen.
Yeah. So let's jump over to the ethics side of this, because this is one that I am extremely fascinated and passionate about. Is we're capturing all this data. There is all this skepticism around it. Not only with this stuff is outside of our organizations, but there's even healthy skepticism inside the organization.
Sure.
Let's talk about data ethics and some of the implications. Let's first define what we mean when we say data ethics. Mm-hmm. So I'd love your elevator definition of what is data ethics.
Oh, now you're putting me on the spot.
I'm putting you on the spot. You said you do Renaissance stuff, or you did, so you're good with it.
No, that's fine. It's doing the right thing. It's as simple as that. And then way back when, I wrote this article on an internal company website. It was called, "What Would Your Mother Say?" And it was, it's like when you type an email and you send it, if your mother saw it, what would she say? And that's kind of the standard that I said, from an ethics perspective. And again, I'm grossly oversimplifying things. But again, it should be coming from the top, and kind of steering away from, kind of avoiding your question as to defining it. But it needs to be prevalent throughout the organization. Again, if it doesn't start at the top, how can you expect it to happen at the bottom? But yeah, from a more pragmatical perspective, what do you do with the data? Do you sell the data? Who do you sell it to? Why do you need this particular piece of information about your learner, or whoever the person on the receiving end is? These are the questions that you need to ask, and kind of make a determination and have specific decision points, as to say, okay, well, maybe we don't need that information, or if we do, what do we do with it? How do we use it? Can we normalize it? Kind of the example that I gave, if you're taking an online course and you're based on some kind of algorithm, you're being steered in a certain direction. Okay, let's apply that to a corporation and say, okay, now you have an employee taking some training, taking some tests. Well, based on their results, they're not manager material, so we're going to move them into a technical track. Now we're talking ethics. What kind of impact does it have on a person's life, career, reputation, things of that nature?
Yeah, well, and that's, I like you've had, there's a couple quotes now that I think I'm probably going to steal from you. So the data ethics is, would my mother be okay with this? I think that's a great one. There you go, everybody. Use that as your baseline. But I think it's a very important thing for us to consider as we do this. And one of the things you hit on there that I think is completely valid in making sure people think about this is, and I guess this is my best practice, is let's capture the least amount of data required, right? Let's think about what we need, and let's not just, because I think in some cases the practice has been, let's just get as much as we can and we'll figure out later what we're going to do with it. And that's where you open yourself up to risk, because now you're saying, whoa, you can't even pass the red face test of, why do you have this data? What are you doing with it? And now it gets breached and you have to answer, well, like, why were you holding on to that? And what were you doing with it in the first place?
Right.
Versus if you're very intentional about, well, this is the data we're going to capture. Here's why. Here's what we're going to do with it. That's a very different situation. Is that a fair approach?
That's absolutely true. And I think you mentioned it before, from a data architecture perspective, as you're building these solutions and collect the requirements, that becomes a vital piece of that entire requirements document, the data architecture. What are you capturing? Where is it going? What do you do with it? Who are the partners that you may be dealing with that could have access to that information? So no, absolutely agree.
Yeah. Well, and the other piece that I think is important with this, that I think we could all do a better job, this isn't just learning and development, is from an ethical standpoint. I think some of the hesitation that you see from end users is the lack of transparency into what the story being told of, hey, here's what's being done with your data. And I think sometimes people are a little nervous to share that, but I think that helps bring people and put people at ease to say, hey, listen, here's what you're giving us. Here's the data that we're capturing. Here's why we're capturing it. And here's how we're planning on using it. Hopefully the answer to that is to help you with XYZ. Like, these are the outcomes we're driving to, and here's how your data is going to help us best help you get there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And you want to try and avoid that being enforced at a government level, but with rules and regulations like GDPR. You have to have those messages before people enter information. Oh, again, what am I collecting? What am I doing with it? What are your rights as a consumer or a provider of that information? You want to try and get away from that. So from a company, corporation perspective, or even a learning institution perspective, you have to be prepared to present the learner with that information. And again, learning analytics is becoming more and more prevalent, and it's great because now you have a lot of data that you previously didn't have that can hopefully help as a learning and development professional, help you in your job. But again, you have to make sure that no personal information is being used to come to conclusions when you can try and normalize that information and make it more anonymous. Data is great. You can do a lot with it. It can help you become a better person in what you're doing, can help the business, can help your function. But you have to have very clear and transparent, like you said, rules and how you plan to use that data, and show the outcomes. Like, hey, look, we did this exercise, we did this training. This is the information that we gathered that was completely anonymous, and here's how it helped, maybe make a better version of the training, reach more people, information that we didn't have access to a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, and with these with this stuff, I think one of the challenges with data that sometimes makes people a little uncomfortable is sometimes it shows us the not so pretty things about the way we do things, or the practices that we have, or the tendencies that we tend to operate against, because it's simply capturing what's happening. It's just capturing what's happening. And so when some of this stuff comes out and people go, wow, that was so biased, or this was so terrible, it's like, well, all it's doing is telling you what's happening in the organization. And sometimes that makes us a little uncomfortable, where that ethical piece comes in, where it gives us a chance to look at it and say, we don't like that. What can we do to change it? But we have to have that ethical guidance along the way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, when we talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's certainly not perfect, and it won't be for a while. When you think about collecting and managing data, it's only as good as the algorithms that were put into the system. So you should, until you've done enough validation, you should always have some kind of checkpoint and say, okay, here's what the data says, here's what we know is the truth, and let's see where the gaps are and see, which way we're going to swing from a final solution perspective. It's never black and white. We talked about that before. There's a lot of gray areas. But again, data is being spit out by a stupid machine. Again, all it does is taking what you put in and whatever someone else programmed it to do,
right,
and giving it back to you. It doesn't necessarily have, or maybe not yet have,
critical
the experience that you as a learning and development leader have. You may say, hey, this based on this data, we recommend classroom training. And you may know, like, well, based on the geographic location and other challenges.
Right.
Yes, but no.
Well, and that goes back to, see, now this could be a whole nother episode, right? But that goes back to one of the challenges with machine learning is the black box, where we don't necessarily see into how those decisions are being made. It goes in and it comes out. And like you said, yes, part of it is how good is that algorithm? The other part is how good is the data set that it's making its decisions off of. If you've got a really biased or corrupt data set, you can send the best algorithm at it, but the decisions it makes or the conclusions it draws may not be good, which is where that human in the loop comes in.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's garbage in, garbage out. No matter what how good, like you said, your algorithm or your system is, you have to make sure that your data is clean, it's accurate. But again, you don't know that. So the good thing is, even if you get garbage out, you say, like, why is this garbage?
Why is this garbage?
Right. And okay, the solution is working out. So, okay, so what is it that we're putting in, or why are we putting it in this way? Well, we've always done it for the past 5 years. This is the information that we gathered and made our decisions based on that. Well, maybe that needs examining. And it kind of goes back to the topic I mentioned before. The lift and shift. You take something that you've been doing for a long time, throw it into an automated solution. Well, may not get the results that you expect. So again, take that time to look at what it is that you're currently doing. Make sure that's actually accurate and reflecting real life or reflecting the strategy that you're trying to accomplish, and then throw it into an automated solution.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up at the top of the hour. I told you we were going to run out of time before we ran out of things to talk about, because I feel like we've just cracked the surface on this stuff, and we could go much deeper, but I really appreciate you being here. Bas, it's been great getting to know you over the last bit here, and I think the three big takeaways that I'm walking away with, and I'll give you a sec to do yours, but the three big ones that I see is really building that partnership and thinking with the desired end in mind, right? And building that partnership with IT, making sure that as you're going through this, you're just upskilling yourself and better understanding what these things are. Not that you need to be an expert, but that you can really start to understand what's going on so you can ask the right questions and do some of this stuff on the front end instead of just outsourcing it. And the last piece is, as we move into these new and emerging technologies and are doing more things with data, that we don't lose sight of keeping our critical thought and the thing that makes us uniquely human still in the loop, because that is so important to look at that and make sure we're looking at it and putting our critical thinking and human element on top of that. Anything you would add to that?
No, just make sure that these rules and regulations change on a dime.
Yeah.
And make sure that you're flexible enough to adapt to the rules and regulations, and preferably be ahead of the game. Again, being positive here. You know what it is that you have to do to do the right thing. You don't have to tell an institute, government institute or some kind of regulatory agency to give you rules and regulations. If preferably you would have a regulatory agent come in and say, you guys, you're in great shape. We don't have to do anything. Rules and regulations change, and you can go to your leadership. You know what? We don't need to change anything in the way we're doing. We're already doing it. So again, and it requires, like you said, a lot of collaboration with compliance, security, IT. Have those conversations and make sure that they know that you're also in it for them. They need to be trained. They need to be upskilled.
Yeah. We need to bring them along for the ride, right?
Yeah.
We can learn from them and upskill ourselves, and we can upskill them alongside us. I think that's a great final piece. All right. Well, thank you again, Bas, for being here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in and watching. Those of you listening, thanks for listening. Be sure to like, share, comment, let us know what you think so that we can continue to improve things. And thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
All right. Thanks, all.
Thanks.